With veganism in the workplace on the rise, it's really important for employers to understand what's important to their team. Whether they be in staff or management, there is a certain culture that's being developed as a result of the vegan movement. In today's episode, Sammie Herrera talks about veganism, diversity, and acceptance in the workplace. So stick around, you're in for a treat.
Welcome to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show, where your host, Kathleen Gage, shines the spotlight on vegan and plant-based businesses and entrepreneurs from all walks of life committed to cruelty-free eating, healthy lifestyles, animal compassion, and the environment. Enjoy the show.
So, Sammie, it's really interesting, the topic we're going to be discussing, and who knows where this is going to go. But what we were discussing is veganism in the workplace and respecting diversity. So what is your experience with veganism in the workplace?
Yeah, really great question. So my experience of being vegan in the workplace is being a vegan in the workplace. So I've been vegan for about 2.5 years now. It'll be 3 years in December, which is really exciting. And so I've had the experience of transitioning to being vegan during a specific moment of employment. So during a time when I'd already been hired, people had known me to be someone who had eaten meat, who had eaten cheese, things like that. And I also had an experience of multiple experience working in the workplace where I started off and it was very clear, hey, I'm vegan. This is more to me than just what I eat. This is part of my lifestyle. This is what I do. And this is how you can best accommodate me, kind of like adding that to the start. And so my experiences with being vegan in the workplace is definitely when I transitioned to being vegan for the new year, right? January, I think it was January 2019, right? Definitely surprised people. It definitely opened up conversations. And I think that's helpful, right? Like sometimes it can be frustrating to have the same conversation over and over again. But when you have the open mindset of, hey, like every time someone hears about someone else being vegan or hears about a new recipe, like that could be helping them transition to being vegan themselves. And I actually even participated in Veganuary that year. I participate every year. And so it was really helpful to even like, instead of having like 3-hour conversations, it's like maybe have a 20-minute, 30-minute conversation and then pass along those resources as well. It was pretty convenient.
Right. Well, and one of the things you said is, just letting people know that you've made a lifestyle change because pre-pandemic, I did a lot of keynote speaking and I would go to conferences. And what I started doing, because I'm coming up on 3 years very shortly. And what I would do is I would talk to the meeting planner and say, hey, listen, I've made a change in the way I eat. And I would be really appreciative if you could accommodate me having all plant-based meals, because initially it was plant-based eating for me. And then I transitioned to where I identified as a vegan. And it was amazing how accommodating people would be if I just presented it from the perspective of, this is what I'm doing. Can you help me out? What is your experience with people who they take the defensive immediately and they assume that people are going to judge them in a negative way for having transitioned to being vegan? Because I see that a lot where people automatically assume that somebody's going to say, oh, well, you're a crazy vegan, which, I'm sure I've been called a crazy vegan once or twice, but how can people best handle that dialogue to open up the conversation?
Yeah, that's a really great question because, people psych themselves out of going into veganism or telling people they're vegan. I know one of my close friends, we went to grad school together. I was talking about being on this podcast and he was like, I didn't know you were vegan. I was like, dang, I need to tell more people. Like, I need to tell more people because it's so important that even me telling folks that I'm vegan, like that could be the next step where someone's like, okay, finally, I need to do one more, rule of 7 in marketing. I need one more touch point to feel like I could try this out. And so my experience with that, that sense of like, oh, are people going to think I'm annoying? It's very similar to experiences people have in career when they're making a career transition. I'm so sorry. Even though I don't have the experience you're just setting yourself up for failure. You're setting yourself up for people to feel sorry or pity for you. So when you're newly vegan and you frame it as, oh, well, I'm so sorry to be annoying. Oh, well, let me just let you know, like when you treat it as an afterthought instead of like, this is what I do. This is who I am. I can imagine me even stepping up helps other people have more choices because especially as a vegan, like there's been many times where the workplace has had like a retreat and then I get one option and everyone else gets like 5 to 10 options at this restaurant. And I remember one of them was this breakfast place. The only vegan things there were tofu scrambles. And I love tofu, but I hate tofu scrambles because they remind me of eggs. And I've always hated eggs. So I'm just like, well, I technically have no options because you gave me so few options. I'm also an individual person who likes different things, just like other folks. And so it can be definitely frustrating, that sense of people doing the bare minimum and saying, well, there's stuff there, without really getting a sense of like, how do we actually make it equitable and have people have the same experience across eating and across like employee like advancement or employee appreciation?
Well, and more, and especially I think with the pandemic, a lot of people have become aware of how they're eating and that they can minimize their complications should they be diagnosed with COVID, that if they eat a healthy diet. I mean, that is a fact of life, and there's no disputing that, even though some people would like to dispute it. But the healthier you eat, the more you minimize your risks. And I think companies are doing a disservice by not raising awareness around the options available. And especially companies like high-tech companies, they might have cafeterias where they can offer those choices to the vegans and the non-vegans. I mean, like you say, to make it equitable. And I want to remind people that you're listening to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show with Kathleen Gage, and I'm talking with Sammie Walker Herrera, and she is with Self-Made Millennial. She is an accountability coach. And tell us what that means to be an accountability coach for Self-Made Millennial.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And so what an accountability coach is something that so many people wish they had, right? Like they wish they had me in their corner. They wish that like I could poke them every day or send them an email or remember the things they talked about, what their goals were, what they're hoping to achieve and how they can achieve them. So what I do as an accountability coach is for the clients who are part of Madeline's Standout Job Search program, I send weekly emails with personalized recommendations for clients based on things they had talked about the last week, goals that they had set at the start of the program. And I really try to make sure that these are goals that, even fit some of that SMART goal structure, right? Specific, measurable, attainable. Is it relevant? Is it actually a goal you want to achieve, or is it a goal that you feel like you have to, right? And then time-based, like, hey, are you able to reach out to 5 new contacts and 2 previous coworkers this week to learn about opportunities, versus me coming in saying like, have you networked yet? And so the role of an accountability coach is to be positive, to be non-judgmental, and to really help folks get a sense of what are those true obstacles and roadblocks, because often we might think something's attainable within a week, and it's not. And that's not a function of you not being able to do it. That's just a function of the goal not being realistic. Right. And that's okay. We can definitely set it based on what you need.
Well, tell us more about what Self-Made Millennial is, because I had the good fortune of interviewing Madeline recently, and her episode is live. We'll put the link down below in the show notes so everybody can actually click over to that. But tell us from your perspective what Self-Made Millennial is and what you offer to the marketplace.
Definitely. So Self-Made Millennial was built out of the YouTube channel that Madeline Mann created. So of the same name, Self-Made Millennial, which I believe now has about 140,000 subscribers. I know that number is going to change by the time that this is published, because we just have so much interest from folks who are trying to get a sense of how can I make the job search feel less dreadful? How can I actually have a job search that's based on my goals, my wants, my desires, my needs versus fear of not being employed or being underemployed, which is having employment, but it's not truly recognizing your skills. It might not be at the salary that you know that you deserve, or you aren't sure what your value is, for example. And so Self-Made Millennial, born out of that, the coaching programs, born out of the YouTube channel, the goal is to really help people know the step-by-step ways to navigate a modern job search, a job search that's predominantly over the internet, but that's not dependent on online applications. And that allows people to really tap into these psychological triggers that help them be noticed by the people that they're networking with recruiters and the folks who are making the decisions about whether they're extended the offer or not.
Excellent, excellent. And Madeline and I got into a lot about that. And we actually talked about how vegans can look for companies that they're aligned with. And she gave me some shocking revelations about, there's the old school of putting a resume together and kind of throwing mud on the wall and hoping something sticks. And then the really targeted, it's kind of a minimalist approach of like you approach fewer people. But let's talk about the whole thing with diversity in the workplace and veganism in the workplace. With so many changes that are going on because of the internet, because of the pandemic, because of the fact that there are many people that are unemployed right now, underemployed, they're misemployed. What can people do to really find that environment that is aligned with what their values are, and then to find an environment that really respects diversity? We'll talk about that. And then the flip side, what can employers do to respect diversity?
Great questions. So I think networking is a huge component to this. If there are folks in your network, in your community, or folks that you can meet that you realize share similar values, and really not only share those values, but live out those values to the point where every environment they're in has to be part of those values, or that, offsets their boundaries, for example. I would say that networking to get really clear on, okay, how do I want to live out my values? And how can I learn from this person and how they had their job search and how their companies are exhibiting these specific values. So I think networking is a big component to that as well. I think also just doing some more research on different brands, like regarding sustainability, regarding veganism, regarding plant-based, because we know, and I know I checked out a few of your podcasts as well, like words like natural, pure in the beauty industry, they don't really mean anything. So how do you navigate like that greenwashing or that vegan washing of things to really get the core of, this is actually an organization that fits my values? And so with that, altogether networking, as well as when you're in the interview, my key is asking key questions, like asking really good questions. Like if we ask a question that's like, oh, does your company value sustainability? First off, it's kind of a closed question. People can just say yes or no. So that's not the most effective type of question. But maybe a question can be something like, during the pandemic, I know there's been issues with the supply chain, and unfortunately, things haven't been able to be as sustainable. How have you been able to navigate that in those changes, and how has that changed in the last few months? Is something that, instead of you as the interviewee always having to pick stories to ask, now you're getting answers that are stories as well. And that really shows like someone's true colors and what their values are.
I love that you actually kind of turn the tables on the interview, where the interviewee is the one asking questions also. And I think oftentimes people are afraid to ask those questions. And I've been on podcast shows where the podcaster host thinks that they're the only one who's going to ask a question. And I'll start with a question of like, well, tell me a time when, and they're like, wow, that's the first time anybody's asked me a question as a host. And, so I really appreciate that. But let's look at, with diversity, for example, whether it be sexual orientation, whether it be religious diversity, whether it be political diversity, lifestyle to do with veganism, what are some of the questions that people should be asking to make sure that the organization that they're going to join is aligned with their values?
Yes. Definitely questions that can be really helpful to ask to get deeper into that sense of values would be learning if they do have employee resource groups, learning if there are specific organizations or associations that they're a part of that champion diversity related to the specific industry that you're in. That can definitely be really helpful. So for example, in my last role, I was working at the University of Florida Career Connection Center, and I was the chair for the diversity committee for about a year or so. And so, of course, in championing all different aspects of diversity, like you mentioned, sexual orientation, gender identity, race and ethnicity, for example, I realized there was a gap for about 4 of us out of 20 or so who were vegetarian and vegan in being able to access food or access like rewards or prizes during like times when it's employee appreciation. And so that sends a signal that certain employees aren't appreciated compared to others. And you can even imagine, for example, having a happy hour where it's predominantly alcohol.
You just read my mind. I have to stop you there because you just I'm 37 years sober. And, like when there, when I worked for companies and they would have happy hours, it was like, well, it doesn't really fit for what I do. So, okay, I am sorry for interrupting, but I had to throw that in because that's a big one. Somebody who's in recovery to go to a happy hour and they feel the pressure to have that first drink, that could ruin their life.
Oh, definitely, for sure. Especially if there's other barriers like, oh, well, the alcoholic drinks for this ticket are free, but if you want a mocktail, then it's not free. Like if there were barriers like that as well. And so one thing, I'm so glad you jumped in, right? Like if that resonated with you highly, that will definitely resonate with listeners as well. But there has to be more of these options that are really just so intentional in taking care. And I've had multiple conversations with leaders and employees at my last institution who were like, I just never thought about that. I just never thought about someone being excluded because they can't eat something here. I never thought about someone being excluded because, this doesn't fit like a specific time or this doesn't fit their specific lifestyle and things like that. And often I feel like veganism in the workplace, like the most positive, quote unquote, noticing is like if you start losing weight because you're vegan. And then people are like, oh, like, let me ask you more about that. And there's kind of that tie there. But as soon as it comes to, oh, we have an event in a few days, let me make sure I scrambled something really last minute for Sammie. And then tell her I scrambled last minute so that she feels valued. I don't think that feels as like valuable as like it just being integrated into the processes that are already there. And that so I don't have to feel othered and both hyper visible and invisible, which is common like framing of how a lot of marginalized folks, especially Black folks, feel in the
Absolutely. Well, it's so interesting because, okay, I've been sober for 37, almost 38 years. In December, it'll be 38 years. I have a wife of 32 years. I am a vegan. And so I've got all these, people have stereotype images of what that means. And I've actually had people say, you don't act gay. And it's like, what does that mean? I mean, that is like as rude as it gets. Or I never would have guessed you were an alcoholic. And, so there's dialogue that has to go on to educate people. And it's interesting because you mentioned about being African-American, being Black, and being discriminated against. And, some things you cannot hide. It's like, it's right out there. It's like for the world to see. Other things that we can live in a closet, whether it be around veganism, around alcoholism, around sexuality, around religion. And really the most positive thing to do is to make it where it's not something that people have to hide or feel ashamed of. And so what do you recommend for companies to really honor people's lifestyles without going overboard? Because I think we have a pendulum swing too, where people get really on either side of the issue, they get real sensitive and like you have to watch every word that you say. So what can organizations do to be more inclusive? And give us 3 steps of what an organization could do to be more inclusive in addition to what you've already talked about.
Yeah, I think one of those pendulum swings that you've talked about is relying too heavily on your marginalized, on your minoritized folks to have all the education about everything or be psyched, stoked to provide that education. And so, for example, for your podcast listeners, I know this is also video recorded, so folks might not be able to see me. I'm mixed, so I'm both white and Mexican. And so there often seems to be like a little bit of pressure for me to know everything about Mexican history and Mexican vegan history and the intersectionality of everything. And I do know quite a lot just based on my own interests, but that shouldn't be assumed. And so I think one thing that can be really helpful for organizations is just not to pull on so much emotional and intellectual labor from those minoritized in the space. Not always have the same people on the same committees asking the same questions, assuming things about someone's expertise or what they want to do. Because if, for example, I'm a Mexican-American career coach and my interest is career, maybe I don't always want to be talking about diversity and inclusion, even though I have worked in diversity and inclusion. Like there needs to be more conversations about what people want to bring to the office, because then that aligns with their purpose. And it's more likely that they're going to be retained as well. So I think that's really important. Just making sure, like, how do you balance that? I think another thing as well is when you do get feedback, whether that be from a specific box for feedback, or you do pull upon different focus groups or even outside consultants, you need to act on that feedback. there's been times where team and I created, for example, like in town, here are all the vegan places and here are all the veggie friendly places, so that when we were ordering for events, you can be able to look at this and it can be a lot easier. And then a few days before, someone asking me, oh, what do you want to eat from here? Is this a good place? It's just like, didn't we create a resource?
Right.
So that you can reference that and you didn't have to like pull upon us, or if I was out that day, then I wouldn't eat.
I want to add something to that, because years ago, I actually worked with a lot of municipalities, state agencies, and federal agencies. And at that time, I was doing employment satisfaction reviews, basically. Yeah. And I would get consulted to go into an organization and actually sit with employees and find out, what do you really feel about the organization? And I had to gain the trust that I wasn't going to reveal who said what. And there was one municipality that I worked with that the mayor was not very well liked. And the mayor hired me to, actually had to go before the city council and get approved. And I went in and it was a small municipality. I talked to every single employee and they all said the same thing. Basically, the mayor had no social skills, treated people horrendously, was very abusive. I mean, there was a lot that came out. And so I put my report together and the mayor basically said, I want you to change what's in there. And I said, what do you mean change what's in there? And she said, I want you to change the information because we can't put this before the city council. I said, no, I won't. She goes, you won't get contracted again. I said, I guess I don't get contracted again. And it was horrendous to me that here they had invested a lot of money at the time. I think it was a $10,000 contract. That was about 25 years ago. Yeah. And so 10,000 back then is now today it'd probably be 20, 25,000. And I thought, isn't it a pity that here they invested this money or they spent it and she didn't want to take the recommendations and she basically cut me off. And, it's unfortunate because the truth is what can really salvage an organization and help an organization to thrive. So I wanted to add that in because many times people do ask for recommendations. At another period, I actually sat on a council for the Department of Workforce Services in the state of Utah. And it was always shocking to me how long it took to make a decision. And by the time the decision was made, the problem was swept under the carpet or they went on to something else. And I thought, it's so frustrating that there's a problem. We know there's a problem. We have a solution and they're not acting on the solution. So sorry again to interrupt. You're giving me some great food for thought here, but keep going on recommendations for organizations.
Definitely. So, I mean, a big part of it, use them, take them, tell people that we hear you and this is how we're implementing them. So, hey, we're really going to be thinking about how we give appreciation to folks. And so with that as well, like I would say my third recommendation is you need to know the individuals working for your organization. So often like onboarding can be like, here's our sexual harassment policy, like here's like all the trainings you need to do within the first week. But there should be ways to really get to know people and even like short surveys, acting on those surveys, knowing who's in your organization based on how they want to disclose or self-describe. And then also making it easy for folks when they do make a transition to veganism, or for example, maybe transition gender identity, right? Transition in the office place. How do you then, what are those processes to make sure people are in the know who need to be in the know, so that you can be able to be like supported throughout your entire employment? Correct.
So, Sammie, I'd like you to let people know how they can get in touch with you. What's the best way for people to reach you?
Definitely. So one of the best ways to reach me is on LinkedIn. And so one of the best ways to reach me is then www.linkedin.com/in/SammieMLWalker.com. /SammieMLWalker. So I'll repeat that. So that's www.linkedin.com/in/SammieMLWalker. With that, regarding LinkedIn, Self-Made Millennial does have a LinkedIn checklist. So this is a LinkedIn profile checklist so that if you feel like you've been ignoring your LinkedIn or you haven't even started your LinkedIn, for example, you can be able to review that, have that base, and feel so much more confident when you're reaching out to folks. And also networking with folks you either know or don't know about their values-based organizations.
Excellent. We'll make sure to put the link for the assessment because actually I just signed a client, vegan client. I love it because I've been transitioning to work primarily with vegan folks. And
that's awesome.
I was looking at the LinkedIn profile. It's like, ooh, this needs some work. I want to remind you, you've been listening to the Vegan Visibility Show, and be sure to leave a review and a rating of the Vegan Visibility Show. Now, back to the interview.
If you did want to do a 1-hour LinkedIn masterclass, you can find that at www.theselfmademillennial.com.
Excellent.
www.theselfmademillennial.com.
Well, we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. And I want to remind people that this is Kathleen Gage. You're listening to Vegan Visibility Podcast Show. And I'm talking with Sammie Walker Herrera, and she is with Self-Made Millennial. She's an accountability coach. And what are your final thoughts for people who are looking to really find aligned work and to thrive in the environment that they're currently in, around being a vegan, around diversity issues, and around just thriving in life?
I think one of the best ways to thrive in life, be confident, and that kind of go into your current workplace, if you are making a career pivot, if you are exploring other options, it's just be confidently vegan. Be who you are, and that happens to be vegan. So for me, being vegan is actually a huge part of who I am as a person. I would say it's just as integral to me as being Mexican American, as being a salsa dancer, for example. Like, it's just something that I am. It's what I do. And there's nothing I can't do. There's just things that I don't do that are non-vegan, that are part of my life. And so when you are confidently vegan, you just let people know, and let that, just drop that in to conversations, or recommend different things, or mention like, hey, my vegan anniversary is coming up. I'm super excited to celebrate that because that means something to me. I think that's really important. And when we tell people about ourselves, so for example, when we're networking with folks that maybe we haven't talked to in a few years, when we hop on the phone, we hop on Zoom, and we tell them life updates, that should be one of them. And you never know who they know, or how they can connect you, or how you can even provide some education that they ask for because they're curious.
Well, and I love that recommendation, that it should be kind of top of the mind, because Madeline talked about that too on a resume, for example. If somebody buries down below something about veganism, instead of bringing it to the top, especially if you're targeting a company and you want to join a company that's kind of their mission in life, it's like that should be at the forefront. So I so appreciate all that you're sharing. And a quick story about, educating people in a kind way. My mother-in-law has been just amazing about really supporting me in my vegan journey. And initially she would bring me plant-based foods, and she would, without really reading the label. And some of them had dairy and some had egg whites in them. And I said, I really appreciate what you're doing, but I can't eat it because of this. And it was a process of really appreciating what she went the extra mile to really support me in my decision. And initially she thought it might be a phase, because, I tend to be pretty extreme with some things, and whether it be running or weight training or whatever it is. And she thought, okay, this probably will pass. And now she realizes this is a lifestyle. So she fully supports me. But when she would make an effort, I made sure to really acknowledge that, without saying, oh, I can't believe that you brought me something with egg whites in it, because people don't know until we educate them. So your final thoughts for people as we close here. What are your final thoughts for people, Sammie?
My final thoughts.
Your final thoughts. And the final answer is
double jeopardy, please. Let's see. My final thoughts are being appreciative of being vegan. Like, stay appreciative of your journey, whether you went straight into being vegan, which is what I did, or you're transitioning or transitioned from being vegetarian. Like, the ways that we honor identity and love ourselves, self-love, like, there's so many parts that we can love about ourselves that we then extend to the world, right? Like, being vegan helps us love the environment, helps us love animals in a new way, helps us really appreciate the ways that small incremental changes that we're making really do change the world. And we don't have to go back in the past to make changes that radically alter the future. We can do things every day that make us love ourselves more and that change the future, even if we can't see it in our own lifetimes.
I love that because, I've been given a lot of thought to that, how people can, for today, make one simple change, whatever that may be. And so, Sammie, I so appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to share your thoughts with my community, and which is your community too. And this is Kathleen Gage with Vegan Visibility, encouraging you, go out, live consciously, eat consciously, and be conscious. Have a great day.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show. Be sure to subscribe to get notified when the next episode is live. And we always appreciate reviews. Join us next time for more inspiration, education, and motivation to build your business one cruelty-free and healthy person at a time.